FreeWilliam has invoked Parley, and you can sign up to do the same. Behold! Parley about Melee 3.0 and hot swapping. FreeWilliam asks, will quick swap by default in Melee 3.0 make weapons that leave zones, like the Synoid Simulor, more viable? I think they definitely are, now that we have Melee 3.0 in some capacity, and that quick swapping makes a lot of kinds of weapons that mostly had a utility or just in general non-damaging function more powerful. The thing I think is not the case is that a lot of weapons do a lot of status, but aren't good for priming because they just kill the enemies anyway. So we have weapons like the Pox that I've heard quite a few people recommend as a good weapon for status priming alongside quick swapping, and I don't think that that's a good choice because the Pox already does really good damage. It's not that it's a bad choice, I guess, it's just not uniquely suited to that purpose. The Pox doesn't hit a very large area, and it does a lot of damage. In fact, I hear the Pox recommended for a lot of synergies that it actually doesn't fit very well, and I think that the reason for that is that the Pox is a powerful weapon that is AoE, and that's just the one people know, so whenever they think about something similar, they think, oh, the Pox, like something like the Pox. Sure, like the Pox, but I think you want to go for something larger, and I like the Synoid Simulor as an example. I think that's a strong example. It hits a very large area for mostly irrelevant damage, and it does pretty good status, all things considered. It's also a weapon that is not particularly good right now, so it actually changes in viability. You know, Pox is not the worst weapon in the world for what we're describing, but the Pox was already very good, so it makes no never mind for your question. So sure, Synoid Simulor. I'm imagining something like the Scourge, which is just a status bazooka, could be pretty good. It hits a lot of enemies in a large area with very little aim for not that much damage, but a lot of status, you know? I think that another important part of this equation, though, is blast. So you don't want to knock enemies over too much because then you get those prompted ground finishers, which will interrupt your combos, depending on what kind of stance you're using. And FreeWilliam, I know that you like that kind of gameplay and that this is a problem you have too. So that's a concern. I definitely think it matters what type of status the weapon is doing, and if the weapon is uniquely suited to status output, but it involves blast to get high status chance, I feel like that's not so great. So I like Synoid Simulor because it has some kind of irrelevant procs, but rare, so like it has innate magnetic. Magnetic is basically useless as a status effect, but it is rare. You're certainly not going to have magnetic already, so that makes it very good for priming, you know? And then you could attach corrosive or viral. Corrosive could go with cold, viral could go with, I don't know, electricity or something. And then, you know, you'd have some good AoE, some good crowd control, corrosive and heat, perhaps. And then you'd have a mix of some CC, some softening, some weakening the enemies, and then some really rare status types that will pretty much always be relevant for condition overload. Although you didn't actually specifically mention condition overload, so let's explore things that might be good for the Synoid Simulor or other status priming weapons to do, leaving zones behind that are not condition overload. So another thing the Synoid Simulor and its ilk could do is protect you while you're meleeing. So Synoid Simulor specifically doesn't block bullets or anything, but it does create large areas of, you know, mild to moderate zone denial, and that could be helpful. So it's sort of like a panic button. You could have like a weapon, a primary or secondary, that you bring along as a panic button for when you're fighting. Something kind of defensive. Again, maybe here Blast is good, or perhaps a weapon that heals you in some way. You know, now that we have swapping to weapons instantaneously, you can bring along the Furus with the lifesteal augment, or the Hema, or what have you, and use those to quickly heal instead of running healing on your melee, and it's like you basically have it anyway, like you can easily get the healing back. Even better, you can use the synth set on a sentinel, or even just a few pieces on your Warframe or weapon, to reload the weapon after you're done healing with it, so you can continue meleeing and shoot for healing whenever you need to, and you never have to stop to reload to keep that gameplay flow. Another thing I know you really like, FreeWilliam, it's important to you that the gameplay flows. So integrating a gun as your healing is only going to be a good sell if you don't have to stop and reload it, you know? So yeah, I think overall this is a pretty cool idea. One thing I haven't seen, I think people just haven't had time to explore this yet, is like exploring the way that you can combine weapon attacks into combos in interesting ways, you know, specifically min-maxing when in a combo you use a weapon attack. I think that's got some potential. I don't know specifically what you would want to do there, per se. I can't think of too many things that are clever or interesting off the top of my head, but I think that that's a horizon for this type of gameplay. that I'm sure we'll figure out as time goes on. But overall, yeah, I feel like having a concoction of status effects for condition overload or just efficacy alongside, completing a weapon by adding healing or maybe even a status effect it wants that you don't want to put on the melee's build, you put that on a gun instead. And even having melee weapons alongside primaries or secondaries that you can use to defend yourself. I think all of those things are interesting ideas. And it even goes so far as to say that you could do some advanced stuff with the Mutalist Quanta with its bubbles that block bullets. If you see a bombard rocket coming or something, you're in the middle of meleeing, swap to it really quick and block the rocket with the alt fire bubbles. That could be really cool. So overall, I definitely think that the sort of master of multiple weapons at the same time, the sword and gun together, that they're sort of encouraging with the Melee 3.0 hot swapping, I think that is unexplored to some degree. We only got it recently, and I'm excited to see what we get with it. I do think it makes a lot of weapons more viable. I feel like it drives home the point that a weapon can be good at something other than damage, and that can be viable. I remember when we were talking about the really weird damage 2.0 thing they had in mind, damage 3.0, damage 2.5 they called it, where they were going to make the impact like ragdoll enemies depending on severity and stuff like that, which was just not that we didn't need that. That's not what damage needs. The damage types are better balanced than they may think. But things like puncture, need some help. Magnetic needs some help. That whole thing, if you remember that was like a while ago now, but if you remember that, I remember that one of the things people talked about was that they felt like weapons are for killing, not for CC. But the truth is that there are a lot of weapons that are really good for crowd control as long as you find a niche for them. I think that what people were thinking when they said that was, why would I CC an enemy if I could just kill them? But there are a lot of weapons that crowd control enemies in a much larger area than any weapon can outright kill enemies, which is why that's worthwhile. If you have your Nightwatch Napalm Ogress, that can CC enemies in a much larger area than any weapon can outright kill those enemies, and that's why there's a point to it. So while I don't think you should use the Nightwatch Napalm Ogress alongside your melee unless you like self-damage deaths, I do think that is an interesting horizon that we're given with hot swapping, and that will become a more used, more common, more viable, more considered viable thing. Those are all very different things now that we have hot swapping. Indeed. I've been Zandy, and I would like to thank FreeWilliam again for their support. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have something to take care of.